All right, I got the song, I got Wade in the Water still in my head, so I almost like want to read this and hum along to it, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to read normally this morning. All right. I'm weird. Okay, verse 1. Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. I know what you're thinking this morning as we get ready to do a series on the Sermon on the Mount. Here's what you're thinking. The Sermon on the Mount is just like MC Hammer and Queen. Right? That's what you're thinking. I know you were. That's what I was thinking this morning. And here's why. Because when I was growing up, my dad had he had a great CD collection, and a couple of those CDs specifically was by MC Hammer, and it was incredible. I mean, the very first song, Can't Touch This, right? Oh, man. When I first heard that as a kid, I was like, what is this? It is awesome. I love that song, and then when the next song came on, it was this song called Pray, and I was like, this is just as good. Fast forward throughout that whole album, I mean, Here Comes the Hammer, like there's all these incredible songs, right? Just one after the other. And then, my dad had this Queen album, and when I first heard that, I was like, another one bites the dust. We Are the Champions, Bohemian Rhapsody, like every single song was just like hit after hit after hit. And I was thinking to myself, do these people ever make a bad song? And then I actually looked at the cover of the CD and realized, I'm listening to the greatest hits albums of these artists. The greatest hits. Friends, the Sermon on the Mount is Jesus' greatest hits. Okay? You might think the sermon, and maybe it was one sermon that Jesus sat down and he preached all, from beginning to end to one group of people. That may be the case, absolutely. But there are a lot of scholars who also believe that what we see in the Sermon on the Mount is a compilation of the greatest hits of Jesus. The consistent themes and stories and teachings that we see throughout all of his ministry, and we see the framework by which you see Jesus do all the things that he did in his time ministering on earth. The Sermon on the Mount, if you read through it, as we will this fall, and it's going to go longer, I can already tell, is going to be Jesus' greatest hits for us. And I'm excited that we're going to read it together. And I think it's important that we do that because we live in a time when really this is throughout all of time, but especially now, when there are all kinds of brands and beliefs of Christianity. There are all kinds of Christians on all kinds of political aisles, all kinds of different ways in churches and all of those things. And if you were to bring someone in from the future and you would describe them, well, what does a Christian believe? What are they like? I'm sure there'd be a lot of people that would show a lot of different varieties of Christianity. And I always think to myself, well, what kind of flavor of Christianity do I want to be? And it's hard for me to get past the Sermon on the Mount and the things that Jesus teaches right here in this sermon. So that's why we're looking at it this fall, and this morning specifically, we're going to wrestle and explore the way that Jesus begins this sermon with a series of blessings that he announces here. Now, as I said last week, when I tried to come together and get this 12 pages down to a manageable number, and again, I think I failed at that. Y'all saw what time I got here this morning. But I finally decided, you know what, we're just going to do this in multiple weeks. All right, so this is part 1 of the Beatitudes. Because throughout all of church history, there have been multiple lenses by which incredible, God-fearing, faithful people have interpreted Jesus' blessings here. And maybe it's because I'm indecisive, or maybe it's because there's a lot of nuggets of truth found in the different lenses by which you can view these, that I think we can't do it justice with just 1 week. And to be honest, I want to just say, all right, y'all meet me back here at 1. Let's just sit down and have a giant Bible study for like 4 hours. But I'm not going to do that because I've got other meetings at Donaldson. Anyway, let's get to it here. The Beatitudes. The Beatitudes. That word you've probably heard to refer to what we just read. It is a Latin term that simply means blessedness. It comes from the Latin translation of this passage here. And with that in mind, I want us to begin this morning. It is so important that we begin to understand this by looking at the first lens. In order to do that, we have to look not at chapter 5, but actually at chapter 4 first to get the context of this sermon. Jesus begins preaching in Galilee. Galilee's like this insignificant, no-name, part of the north of Israel that, no one throughout history would know of if it weren't for Jesus. In fact, growing up, my sister and I, we like to, when we'd go on trips, there was no cell phones, no tablets, so we had to entertain ourselves. Y'all remember those days, right? My sister and I, did you say they're horrible? Yeah, right. I'm sure they can be. Well, my sister and I, one of the things we would do is that we would take the map, because Dad had the big fold-out map, right? And we would take that from him, and we would just try to find the most obscure, random places, and we would look at the names of those places and just laugh. I'm looking at you, Bucksnort, Tennessee, right? Okay? So Galilee is kind of like that. Galilee's this no-name, obscure place, and yet, we cannot miss this, and yet, God himself, out of all the places he could have walked and taught on this earth, he chose that place to begin his ministry. And as he travels and begins his ministry, he starts encountering a lot of people, and he preaches to them about the good news of the kingdom, the rule and reign of God that is showing up right there in their midst through him. And along with that, it says that he healed people. In chapter 4, as we get to chapter 5, we see it says that they brought to him all who are ill, who are suffering with various diseases and severe pain, who are demon-possessed, people with epilepsy, people who are paralyzed, and Jesus healed them all. And that last verse of chapter 4 says that these large crowds were following him. And it brings us into chapter 5, where those large crowds that had followed him were following right here to this mountain where he began preaching. So it's a lot more than just the fishermen that were there. It was all of this group of people, and Jesus begins teaching his disciples, those among the crowd that were interested, that were wondering, well, what is this kingdom? What is this thing that you're doing, Jesus? What is this that you're all about? And so Jesus here sits down and he begins to preach. And this is important because there's a motley crew of people here that he's talking to. These are the people that the theologian Dallas Willard called the hopelessly unblessable people. The hopelessly unblessable. It is this context which is so critical because in order to look at this first lens by which we're going to look at the sermon, we have to see that Jesus is speaking to this hopelessly unblessable group of people. And it's to them that Jesus looks at and says a word that nobody's thinking that day. Blessed. Blessed. Right off the bat, Jesus' sense of blessing, it challenges the nature of who we think are blessed and what we think of when we think of what a blessed life looks at. Who would we look out as Jesus does and say are blessed? Who do you tend to look out and say, oh man, that person is living the good life. That person is living a blessed life. Would you find yourself driving down the streets of Brentwood or over at Casey Homes? Right? Would you call yourself or others blessed when you have your bank account full of money? Or when you feel happy inside? Is that when you're living your blessed life? When life only seems good? See, I think all of us, every one of us has a vision of what a blessed life really looks like. Of who is blessed and when they're blessed. It's not just us. In fact, 150 years before Jesus, we get a whole other set of Beatitudes. There was another Jewish sage, a person named Jesus ben Sarah, who wrote this book called The Wisdom of Syriac. And in this book, it reads a lot like Proverbs. In this book, he has his own version of the Beatitudes, and he says this: "Blessed is the man who delights in his children, and the one who lives to see the downfall of his enemies. Blessed is the one who lives with a sensible wife, and the one who does not plow with ox and ass together. Blessed is the one who does not sin with the tongue, and the one who does not serve an inferior. Blessed is the one who finds a friend, and the one who speaks to an attentive audience." That's who, in his mind and in his wisdom, he described as blessed by God. So who is that? Well, it's a man, first of all, who is married, who has a great, sensible wife. Okay, don't look at your spouse right now. No one be looking around. Who is sophisticated, who watches his enemies lose all the time while he wins. And who is the boss, who has other people that serve him, right? Not the other way around. Who has a lot of friends, and when he walks into a room, people start listening to him. And of course, there's that whole ox and, that whole bit, which we won't get into. And look, some of those things are great, right? Some of those things we might even say, man, those people are blessed. But that isn't Jesus' list. That's not our Jesus of Nazareth's list, right? That's a different Jesus' list. Our culture has its own sense of who's blessed and who isn't. Earlier this year, a member of our government said this in regards to some foreign policy decisions that were being made at the time. This person said, "We live in a world in which you can talk all you want about international niceties and everything else, but we live in a world, the real world, that's governed by strength, that's governed by force, and that's governed by power. These are the iron laws of the world since the beginning of time: strength, force, and power." Now, are strength, force, and power, are those bad things? No, absolutely not. But they can be, depending on how they're used, depending on the ways in which we talk about strength, force, and power. And let me tell you, the implication by this person was that the blessed ones, the ones that are favored, the ones that are living by that iron law, are the ones that have more strength, force, and power over others and can exert their will. The point I'm making through all this is that everybody has a vision of what a blessed life looks like. And these visions of blessing often are tied to whether we have wealth, status, honor, physical health, all of those things that many of us think of blessing. And again, none of those are bad things, and I'm certainly not saying that. They are, in their own way, a blessing, certainly. But are they the barometer right here in the Sermon on the Mount of who God and of who Christ says is blessed? Notice how radically different this looks like for Jesus. And in the context of who he's talking to, remember that, who he's talking to, and what he actually says, Jesus redefines and he recenters the idea of blessing around the sheer grace of God's kingdom. The sheer grace of God's kingdom, meaning that the first lens by which we should look at and understand the Beatitudes is as the surprising announcement of the upside-down grace of the kingdom of heaven that's arrived with Jesus. The surprising announcement of the upside-down grace of the kingdom of heaven that's arrived with Jesus. Jesus is illustrating for us here, the Beatitudes, they're illustrating what Jesus would go on to say multiple times in his ministry, that the first will be last and the last will be first. This is why I actually like how some have kind of interpreted the Beatitudes, because the actual word that's used there in Greek, this word makarios, it was often also said as a celebratory word, like, oh, you just had a new baby? Well, makarios, congratulations, is how it's often translated. You got a promotion? You got a new job? Makarios, congratulations, blessed. Jesus here in this passage is looking out at this ragtag group of people, and he's saying to them, you are blessed. So with this lens of grace in mind, I just want to run through these quickly. Again, I wish we had tons and tons of time. And we'll go back through, like I said, this is only part one. But I want us, with this lens of grace, to look through these blessings and see how they're going to show up for Jesus and in his ministry. So first, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The word poor here doesn't just mean someone that doesn't have a lot of money. This word poor actually refers to someone who is completely destitute. Someone who has no power in and of themselves to change anything with their circumstances. They are powerless. So one way to understand this phrase and to consider it through the lens by which we're going to talk about this morning is to consider it the way that David does in Psalm 34 when he says, "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted, and he saves the crushed in spirit." Those who are broken to pieces, those who have no power to put their lives back together, those who have been crushed. Those who lack any ability to help themselves, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So we see this when Jesus is out doing ministry and a local synagogue leader runs up to him and says, "Jesus, if you don't show up right now, my daughter's going to die. I can't save her. There's nothing I can do. There's no health insurance. There's no hospitals. There's nothing. Without you, Jesus, I am powerless to help." And Jesus responds immediately. Or what about when Jesus encounters a woman caught in adultery? She is powerless before her accusers. They throw her down in front of Jesus. She's guilty. She's been caught in the act. She's vulnerable. She's being used by them to try to make a point. She's going to be killed for this. And Jesus steps in her place and uses his power, his strength, his force to protect her and to make sure that no harm comes to her. Blessed are the poor in spirit, the powerless, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Mourning in this context is not what you feel after the Titans lose or after I feel week after week when the Vols lose, okay? That's not the kind of mourning that Jesus is talking about here. Rather, Jesus is referring to the deep pain and anguish that's felt and experienced at all that has gone wrong in God's good world and all that has gone wrong within us. It's what Jesus experienced when he was walking into a town, and right about the time he walked into the town, this funeral procession was coming out of it. And in there, Jesus sees this woman who's just wailing, and he comes to find out that she's the mom, and the person that has died is her only son. And Jesus, it says, he was moved by compassion. He was moved by what he was seeing there, because this woman was going to be vulnerable in a way that none of us could even think to imagine. And Jesus goes and brings this boy to life. It's when Jesus is having dinner at a religious leader's house and a sinful woman comes in from the community. And as she comes into Jesus, it says she anoints his feet, and then she just starts weeping over them and trying to dry them off with her hair. Meanwhile, everyone else at the party's like, this is getting a little awkward, Jesus. This is not the kind of party I thought this was going to be. And not just because of what she's doing, but because of who she is. Jesus, do you know what kind of person she is? Do you know what she's done? Do you know how, if you knew that, you wouldn't be anywhere near her? And Jesus instead says, if you knew who I was, you would know what's really going on here, because Jesus welcomes her grief and her pain, and he declares her forgiven, and he comforts her. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the land. Who are the meek? Well, in Psalm 37, David is writing about the righteous and about the needy who are being attacked and who can't defend themselves. And he says, God will come to their rescue. Blessed are the meek. These are the unimportant, the overlooked, the forgotten ones, the nobodies that we sang about earlier. These are the numerous times that Jesus heals the lepers in society. He finds the ones that are social outcasts, the ones that can't be around others, the ones that no one would look at, and Jesus heals them when he finds them. This is the Samaritan woman who shows up to the well at noon because she doesn't come when everybody else comes, because she has a reputation in town. She's got a hard life that she's been through, and so she shows up in the hottest part of the day because it's the only time that she can find peace and be alone. And right when she does that, guess who's there? Jesus. He shows up when no one else does. This is Jesus when he goes to be invited to a dinner party in Luke 14. And when he gets there, he gets ready to sit down at the table, and he looks and he sees everybody who's trying to get to the front and the head of the table and sit at these places of honor. And Jesus looks at the host and says, hey, pretty cool party you got going here. Pretty cool party. You know what would make it better? If next time you have a party, you don't invite the rich or your family or all these people that can pay you back. Instead, you know what would be awesome? If you can invite the poor, if you can invite the crippled, the lame, the blind, throw a party, invite them to it. Now we're talking. And Jesus literally says, you will be blessed, echoing these same words. Blessed are the meek, the unimportant, the overlooked, the not thought about, for you are first in line to inherit the land. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Righteousness, hunger and thirst, those words describe a lack, right? If you're hungry, you're not full, right? You're experiencing a lack. Anybody get hangry, right? When they're experiencing a lack of food and drink, right? I know some of you do, because I've been around you and you've been around me, okay? One way to look at what he's saying here is to say Jesus is looking at people who experience a lack. They're hungering, they're thirsting of righteousness, of right relationships in their life. They're being taken advantage of. They're experiencing injustice. They're being falsely accused. And so they live with this deep, unmet longing every single day for righteousness to come into their life, to be taken care of, to experience the world that Jesus and that God always designed it to be, but that sin has wrecked it to be. It's Jesus hearing and stopping for the blind man on the road to Jerusalem, the one who the other said, be quiet. Stop yelling out. Jesus doesn't have time for you. Don't trouble the master. And Jesus says, yep, what's that I hear? He's the one that listens and finds him and says, no, we got to sit down and talk. And Jesus is the one who heals him. It's Jesus getting angry at the religious leaders for caring more about trying to trap Jesus and care about their religious rules and laws than healing the person that's right in front of them on a Sabbath day, which we see again and again and again. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they'll be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are those who choose to live even when it hurts, and when they give of yourselves acts of care and compassion, who choose to respond to attacks and wounds, not in kind, but with forgiveness. Blessed are those who choose to not write anybody off, and who are willing to suffer even when it involves giving mercy. I think of Jesus in the midst of a crowd saying, short old Zacchaeus, rich tax collector Zacchaeus, who had defrauded people, who had cheated people of the little bit that they had. And Jesus calls out, Zacchaeus, I see you. I must come to your house today, regardless of all the murmuring and the grumbling all around him. Jesus finds him and extends that mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are those for whom prestige and having their name recognized and being admired by others and going viral, none of that matters. They just want to see God. They just want to know God. They just want to have a heart that's like Jesus's. Those with pure motives and actions who have tried to just do right all the time and yet find themselves coming up short in this world that values cutthroat competition, that values being ruthless on the way to the top, that's all about exaggerated self-promotion and doing whatever it takes to get ahead. This is God when he orchestrates this chance encounter, this beautiful chance encounter between Mary, Joseph, and baby Jesus there when he's born. And we find him meeting Anna, the one who's lived in the temple all day, crying out and waiting to see the Savior. She's devoted her whole life, and now she gets that opportunity. This is Jesus coming to John the Baptist, the wearer of camel's hair, the one who eats locusts, the proclaimer of religious leaders as vipers, the one who preached not in the temple but in the wilderness, and the one who said of his own followers in his own ministry, when they were worried, they said, Jesus, everyone's leaving. They said, John, everyone's leaving. And he said, that's okay. I must decrease so that he can increase. Blessed are the peacemakers, those who wade into conflicts and hurt for the sake of the peace and the well-being of all, who are willing to walk the path of peace, whose cheeks hurt because they've been offering the other cheek. Jesus here says, blessed are the peacemakers, and blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, those who care more about doing right by God and by others, even when it means being mocked, excluded, having eyes rolled at you, or even worse, losing your home or your family or your friends or even your life. This is Jesus praising John the Baptist, not to his face, because John's been thrown in prison, but this is Jesus praising John the Baptist. All of these things, one of the ways that we are to look and understand these Beatitudes is how Jesus and the kingdom is bringing extravagant grace to the least likely people in our world. To those that the world would say, you are last, Jesus comes and finds and says, you are first. To the one of the 99 who's gone off, Jesus says there is no one who is going to slip through the cracks. And we know this because Jesus himself is the living embodiment of the grace that he's extended. Jesus is the one who became poor in spirit for us, who lost all his power on the cross as he gave his life for you and for me. He's the one who mourned over Jerusalem and who mourned over all the ways that sin has wrecked our life, to the point that he didn't just stay in heaven, but he decided to come here to do something about it in your life and in mine. He is the meek one, the one who was thought of as unimportant, who was unthought about and uncared for, the one that the religious leaders, if they'd known who he really was, would have never did what they did. Jesus was the one who hungered and thirsted as he cried out on the cross, I'm thirsty. I'm thirsty. He's the one to bring righteousness to those of us, including me, who have no righteousness of our own. He's the one who extends mercy to us, who deserve it, who need it. He is the one who is only one who is pure in heart, the image of God, who no one has seen God, but we see clearly in him. He is the great peacemaker who rescues us from sin. Jesus is all of these things. The blessing of the Beatitudes is the blessing of Jesus himself, the blessing that can be yours and that can have the impact in your own spirit and in your own soul, more of which we'll talk about next week. But we have to begin by looking at the extravagant grace of Jesus that's here for us and our world. And so as we end, I want you to remember that this grace that has been given to you, it comes with a present reality and a future. As you'll notice, Jesus begins with a present. The kingdom of heaven is yours. And all in the middle, we see the future tense being used. It's yours today, but there's greater hope to come. There's greater hope to come. And so, Brush Hill, people of God here, what flavor of Christianity are we going to be? We see this not only as the blessings of God to others, but may we see this as a commission for us to go into the world, to seek out the hopelessly unblessable, and to go extend the good news of God's grace to them. That's what we're called for, and that's the good news that Jesus has given us and given to share through us. Let's pray.